Bard on the Plains podcast with Mike McPeak. It's about stories, mine and yours.
As I write this, it's FFA week at the school. This is timed to coincide with George Washington's birthday, so mid to late February. Sometimes it would fall at the same time as my birthday, which made me happy. Not only was Washington the first president of the United States, he was also a prominent agriculturist. Him and some of the other founding fathers, mostly Thomas Jefferson, were used as models of character and morals for members to follow. My junior year of high school, I was elected treasurer. In front of my officer station, I would have a bust of Washington, and when the roll of officers would call, I would recite this. The vice president would call for the treasurer, and I'd reply, "Stationed by the emblem of Washington." Why by Washington? I keep an accurate record of all receipts and disbursements, just as George Washington kept his farm accounts, carefully and accurately. Washington was better able to serve his country because he was financially independent. I have many fond memories of being in the FFA. I was just starting my freshman year and my very first year of FFA. The chapter planned a trip to Farm Fest in Lake Crystal, Minnesota. It ran from September 13th to the 19th, 1976. We left Willow Lake the day before on a Sunday. This was my first excursion on my own without my family along. There I was on a bus with a bunch of other excited kids and our new ag teacher, Mr. Thompson. As I said earlier, this was 1976, America's bicentennial. There were a lot of celebrations to commemorate this, and Farm Fest was one of them. This was billed as the biggest convention ever with 900 exhibitors and 1,000 acres of demonstrations. We arrived at our campground the night before. I don't remember a lot from that night, but it was the first time I'd ever slept in a tent. Eventually our energy wore down and we went to sleep. We were up early the next morning and went to see Farm Fest. We had these commemorative brochures that were published for this. I was constantly leafing through it and planning what to see. We also had a terrible drought that year. Dad and I had put up most of what would have been our grain crop as animal feed because the grain wasn't going to amount to much and the hay yield really wasn't there. Anyway, we got there, and we started to look around at different things. It was cloudy, but we didn't give it much thought. After we'd been there for about an hour, it starts to sprinkle, and then it starts to pour. This was all taking place on a guy's hayfield. After about an hour of heavy rain, there was mud everywhere. Eventually, Mr. Thompson decides that our plans are washed out, literally. So we all get into the bus to leave. Well, we weren't the only ones to have this idea. Most everyone else was leaving too. All that rain had transformed this firm hay ground into one gigantic mud bowl. People were getting stuck trying to get out of there, a lot of them in front of us, interfering with our escape plans. So we piled out of the bus, and we just started pushing cars and helping drivers to get unstuck. There were many spinning tires and large amounts of flying mud. Needless to say, by the time we finally got out of there, we were covered head to foot in mud. When we got to the campground to pack up, we all walked into the showers with our clothes on, and we just started washing the mud off. When we finally got our clothes taken care of, we washed our bodies, put on dry outfits, and we went home. What was supposed to be a 3-day trip ended up being an overnight mud fest. I find it incredibly ironic that it had been a severe drought all summer, but the day it finally rained was on the day of the celebration of agriculture in America. They were expecting 1 million people, but instead only 289,141 made it. But I was very happy to be one of them. There were many field trips and judging trips that followed, and state conventions in Brookings, or as some of the residents of the town called it, the Blue Plague. We had lots of experiences there, and some of them I won't get into for reasons of decorum. Our advisor taught us that we were representatives of the town and the chapter, but we were kids after all, and we had our moments. Our senior year, we went to the National Convention. Mr. Thompson sat us down and gave us etiquette lessons about the proper use of silverware and napkins. But I'm glad he did that because it helped me to be a better person. And the National Convention was quite an experience for someone who had barely left the state. I got to see Michael Winslow from the Police Academy films do a hilarious bit about duck hunting, and Robert Schuller gave an inspirational talk about building a highway. I also got to meet new people. I had a kid from Missouri come up to me and start talking. Now, this is going to sound awkward, but remember, this was 1979, and I hadn't wandered too far from home. He was a black kid. It's not that we were racist, it's just that it was mainly European people who had settled here. And my only experience with people who looked different from me was watching TV. But he came up to me and started talking about farming, and I realized that skin color is meaningless because deep down inside, we're all just people. When I was an officer, we were a cocky bunch. We took great pride in making our annual FFA banquet something to be remembered. At the beginning of the banquet, the officers wanted to march into music and a spotlight. Problem was we didn't have a spotlight, so we tried experimenting with different solutions. Finally, we settled on a slide projector with a washer taped over the lens to narrow the beam. We learned a lot about creative problem solving. We had several state officers there along with the state advisor who said that our banquet was second only to the state convention for pageantry. And then there was the time at the FFA banquet, breakfast that we needed something to stir the batter with, so we used a lath. I mean, it was a clean lath. We weren't, stupid. Our advisor, Mr. Thompson, inspired us. He was a hometown boy who'd gone to college and came back to teach. He had been a chapter and state officer and had gone on to receive the American Farmer degree, the highest honor that you can receive. He was always pushing us to be the best that we could be. Under his guidance, we got several BOAC grants, Building Our American Communities, that we used to build corral panels and buy a squeeze chute for farmers to rent to make it easier for them to work their cattle. We did a lot of community projects, and he taught us the importance of giving back to the place that you live. This is why I say I'm very proud to come from Willow Lake. But he did more than just support the community. He supported the students. He was always giving help and advice. There were the farm visits where we would show him what we were working on, and he'd offer constructive criticism and offer to tell us how things could be improved. He also taught me the important lesson about respect. Since he was a hometown kid, we took liberties that we shouldn't have, such as yelling out, "Hey, Kendall," or whistling to get his attention. I was quite guilty of a lot of these offenses. Finally, one day he'd had enough and he sat us down and said, "I'm your teacher, and when we are in the classroom, you will refer to me as Mr. Thompson. You will raise your hand, you will wait your turn." He did this in a quiet but commanding manner that taught me that to receive respect, one must give it first. At the end of my junior year in 1979, my dad passed away. It was just Mom and me on the farm, and I had to finish my senior year. Dad was a taskmaster and would push me to get work done. When he was gone, I kind of started to test my freedom out maybe more than I should have. Kendall would call me into his office for an attitude realignment session. In other words, he would remind me of my responsibilities to Mom and the farm. I did pretty well in the FFA. I was elected treasurer my junior year and sentinel my senior year. I received the Star Chapter Farmer Award and went to get the state farmer degree. I also placed third in the state for ag salesmanship and agribusiness management. But there was more to the FFA for me than just awards. It taught me about leadership and responsibility. It gave me the ability to stand up in front of the crowd and speak without feeling self-conscious. It taught me about the importance of community and giving back to those who help us. Even though I eventually left the farming life, the things I learned in the FFA have served me well. My senior year, I was elected sentinel. Even though I had left farming and became a janitor in school, my job is not a lot different from that of the sentinel. Vice President calling the roll of officers, the sentinel, to which I'd reply, "Stationed by the door." He would ask, "Why by the door?" Through this door, many friends of the FFA pass. It is my duty to see that the door is open to our friends at all times and that they are welcome. I care for the meeting room and paraphernalia. I strive to keep the room comfortable and assist the president in maintaining order. Even though my FFA years are 40 years in the past, I am happy and proud of the things I accomplished then, and am grateful for the lessons I have learned.
If you have a story you'd like to tell, contact Mike on Twitter @BardOnThePlains or by email at bardontheplains@gmail.com. For more information about the stories in this podcast, visit bardontheplains.com.